But what about the 21st century? What about Muslim-Christian relations in the 21st century? Well, that gets kind of interesting and tricky. I will say some things that to some in the audience may be obvious, but my experience is that they are not to neither the average Muslim that I come across nor the average American. They know part of what I say, but they don't understand the way in which I'm going to frame what I say. To understand Muslim-Christian relations today in the 21st century, to understand the relationship, if you will, of Islam and the West, and of Muslims in the West with, let's say, Jewish and Christian communities, one has to appreciate a couple of major, not just facts, but in a sense, see them as realities and experiences. Both Muslims and Christians bring to bear their historical baggage. When I was a young scholar, I was on a panel at the University of Chicago. And Fazlur Rahman, one of the great Muslim scholars of the 20th century, teaching at the University of Chicago, chaired the session. And I had to catch a plane to go home, and I was very nervous about being able to catch the plane to go home, and also nervous about how well I would come across because I was with three very senior scholars. And Fazlur Rahman got up and he said, because I was the last one to speak, could I ask my brothers on the panel to skip over their denunciation of the Crusades and European colonialism and American neo-colonialism and get to the heart of their talk, whatever it is, so that Professor Esposito can have a chance to speak. What he was really saying was that no matter what your topic was, if you had a Muslim scholar, the Muslim scholar would begin by denouncing the past. You see, you know, and even if the talk had nothing to do with European colonialism, somehow it was connected to European colonialism. Or the Crusades, you know, and that's not to deny the reality of the past, but that was there. And similarly, one can talk about the other side. But the reality is that we both have that kind of baggage. And then something else happens. Most people forget that indeed most people in the West knew nothing about Islam or very little about Islam in the Muslim world. And that their knowledge, their engagement with Islam came primarily through the Iranian Revolution. That is a simple fact. And so the encounter of the West with Islam is an encounter, if you're an American, for example, of seeing the Shah of Iran, who was regarded in America, who would come with his wife, be on television. He dressed like us, talked like us, spoke good English, was a modernizing Shah, talked about bringing Iran into the 21st century overnight, was on all the talk shows, was hosted by Jimmy Carter 6 months before Iran fell. It was unthinkable that that Shah would be overthrown by, if you will, a bearded mullah, Ayatollah, the Ayatollah Khomeini, who was not only a strange figure, that is, no one had ever seen an Ayatollah, chances are in the US, but he also looked like an extremely old man because of his white beard, which is one of the reasons I took my beard off after 30 years. I once said that to the Ayatollah Khomeini's daughter, and she looked at me and said, because they showed my passport with this huge beard, she said, why'd you take it off? And I told that story, and she said, it's the first time I went to Iran after the revolution. I was very nervous. She said, but I like men with white beards. And she was sitting under a picture of her father, and I thought, my God, I'm never going to get out of here. I've just embarrassed myself. And then she just sort of moved her veil aside to show me she was smiling so I could relax. But in any case, for Americans, there's the picture of the Shah. There's the picture suddenly of this man. He not only overthrows the Shah, but overthrows him from where? A village in France. I mean, that's impossible. I mean, if you think about it logically, that would happen. And what was part of that process? The taking of American hostages. Every night Americans would put their TV on and they were told that not just Americans were held hostage, America was being held hostage. By whom? By the Muslims. And what did they see every day in the morning or the afternoon when they put on national television? People in the streets of Iran yelling, death to America. Well, you know, if you're the average American sitting there, and you see people grab your diplomats, and they go on, every day you see them on TV yelling, death to America, death to America. You don't need much intelligence to say, they may mean it. You know, I mean, if I turned to my mother at that time and said, guess what? I'm going to go and see some of the mosques in Iran. My mother might have been just a little nervous about my security. So this was the interaction. At the same time, Ronald Reagan, when he came into the presidency, alongside the evil empire, put what? Gaddafi / Khomeini. You remember the night that the United States bombed Libya? Reagan said, why are we doing it? It's Gaddafi, terrorism, and the worldwide Islamic fundamentalist movement. Dan Quayle, the vice president under Bush, speaking at the Naval Academy, said to the cadets, your job is to protect us from being caught off guard internationally by international threats like Nazism, communism, and Islamic fundamentalism. And so both in the minds of Americans, in the visions that they saw through the headline events on CNN, and from their senior political leaders, there was the sense that there were 1.2 billion Muslims, second largest religion in the world, but suddenly now there was this confrontation. And scenes from Lebanon of embassies being bombed and people hijacked reinforced that sense of, if you will, a clash of civilizations. The World Trade Center bombing, for many, had the sense of it's being brought home. As a result, ignorance, headline events bury the complexities, the diversity of what's going on in the Muslim world. And so everything gets seen through the prism of, if you will, an Islamic threat equated with Iran / Khomeini. You can see that nowhere more clearly than in the 1990s. Because if in the 1980s the fear was Iran's export of the revolution, both in the Middle East and to the wider world, or of radical groups such as the group that assassinated Sadat, in the 1990s, when you have elections and you would think this is going to be fine, it's going to show that Islamists participate within the system, they are major social forces within society, developing institutions, they are major political forces. The reality of it is that many of the governments in the West, like many of the regimes in the Muslim world, were even more panicked, because now it looked like Islamists were going to come to power through ballots, not bullets. The inability to deal with the reality of Islam and of Muslim societies.